The year is 2200X. Mankind is on the brink of destruction. The Idiocracy has become the reality. The world is on its last embers. And Sony, to celebrate the release of the PlayStation 97, they have recreated the world's greatest game, The Last of Us Remastered, Remakes, Neo, Edition, EX plus Alpha! Watch as your favorite characters are now just talking skeletons to showcase their proper age, and look at the moss! So much detail, detail, detail! Buy now today for the low price of $1,000! Buy now, now, now! Disclaimer, multiplayer still not included. Buy now today! Can't do that voice as much anymore. Must be getting old. Hi! Hello! I'm MangaKamen, and I like to think that I'm an avid gamer. It's what I love to talk about on this channel and what it's like to do on my Twitch account, which you guys should totally go do so you can make fun of me for my terrible game skills. Shilling aside, I've been playing the Paper Mario remake, though I would argue it's more of a remaster since it pretty much retains all the content in the original game and only adding a few changes here and there. That's probably a take so hot there's probably a flaming arrow in my back, but self-deprecation aside, the difference between the remake and remaster, there have been a lot of those happening in the gaming industry, especially of late. I can appreciate those sorts of things. After all, we're living in a time period where the gaming industry is reaching 70 years old, and there happens to be a big issue with video game preservation. So remaking and remastering games is a great idea for people who couldn't possibly experience the games that made up... Son of a bitch! The Last of Us? Why is this... Okay, that one makes sense. This was for the PS4. A little weird that it was made a year afterwards and... Who is throwing these? Yes, it's a meme to make fun of The Last of Us and its sequel for having remakes and remasters, which despite your opinion on the games, I do think that this game has pretty much changed Naughty Dog for better and for worse. Listen, as a fan of Jak and Daxter series and Crash Bandicoot, it feels like a slap to the face. Ow! So, what are the issues with remasters and remakes? Well, there are a few of them which can be broken down to three parts: removal, selection, and replacement. Let's get into it, shall we? When you talk about things in the vein of remasters and remakes, there's always the aspect of removing things from the original games, whether it be huge chunks of gameplay, characters, or elements that are designated as unsavory. There's always going to be the issue of people finding fault with stuff like that. Let's consider probably one of the latest examples, and that would be Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster! As a longtime fan of the Dead Rising series, as noted by my video retrospective on the matter, and myself remaking my own remaster of my own video, I do have some high hopes for the game, especially since it's Capcom revisiting one of the most iconic series and putting it into the Resident Evil engine. Dead Rising has been of a rocky history, with its third title being of a decisive one, and the fourth game...
Game makers everywhere think they know what they want to make all the time, and it isn't until you get in front of normal human beings where they start playing the game and you see what they do, and they just want to mess stuff up. They just want to go around and knock stuff around, they want to blow things up, they want to do stupid things in the game. And so it's our mission to create stupidity tools for the user.
There's a reason why it's pretty hated. And hey, with series like Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, and the Ace Attorney series did manage to get the company a lot of good karma. Hell, Dead Rising 4 was pretty much the last big mistake the company has made in the last decade. And while I'll still hate the game for all its matters, the fact is that they're trying to revitalize the series with this remaster is good. Yet, even this is a bit of a small controversy somewhat. I'm not sure if you can even call it that since the game isn't out yet, and if I'm honest, I'm more annoyed that they didn't get TJ Rotolo to voice Frank. Which, smooth move, Capcom, you didn't even contact the guy to see if he wanted to come back? I poke fun at this, and it does suck. But according to interviews and the videos released, the developers are intending to try to keep the game as close to the original as possible, just with a shiny new coat of paint on it. Which I can understand to a degree, but sometimes doing that can get rid of the charm that the original titles hold. I'm not saying that's the case for DRDR, since the game is being made in-house, and thus less of a chance of that being screwed up, but the art style for the game really worked as a juxtaposition for the game's serious narrative matter, and it tied in greatly for how you could dress like a goober and that carry on to the cutscenes. For DRDR, it's a bit of a mixed bag to me. Again, I haven't gotten the game yet, so there's always the chance that this'll change, but some areas look good and colorful in the trailers and others just feel off-putting, and that could be because how some of the areas look kind of washed out. God, I do not want to go back to the era of everything being dark, brown, and gray in the gaming world. I don't want to go back! Still, despite my issues with how the game looks, it's only skin deep, and the developers have said this.
If you've played the original, rest assured that its core remains unchanged in this deluxe remaster. We did our best to respect the direction of the original game. We kept the fundamental gameplay the same while improving upon the user experience. With this, we believe that both veterans and newcomers alike will be able to enjoy a fresh experience.
So while I may be a bit skeptical about it, I'm looking forward to this, especially since they're clearly showing respect to the original game. Sure, there's something about this, where it looks like they completely rehauled one of the psychopath's designs, Larry. There's always going to be some controversy with this sort of thing, whether it be done for good or bad reasons. I personally don't mind if there are redesigns in the game, but my issue is that it kind of flies in the face of it being a remaster when you drastically change a character's design. I don't really have an opinion on this change, other than I think that the redesign is goofy and looks a bit too clean, especially for the idea that the character being a psychopathic butcher who might have been a cannibal too. Then again, we've only seen about 1 second of the character in an extreme close-up who has some very wonky lighting. Who knows, we might see more of the dirt and grime of the character as well as how he talks and his mannerisms. Other than it kind of flying in the face of being an actual remaster, I don't have a problem with designs of this character, especially since it's not a character like Frank West or Carlito, but I can only speak for myself. Granted, there are other remakes and remasters that don't really follow this kind of trend, and I know I'm going to piss some people off with this example. Keeping in line with the topic of Capcom, the remake of Resident Evil 3 is probably one of the biggest stumbling points I personally have talked about a number of times. Listen, I've even gotten to the point where I had to make a video talking about how messed up Capcom ruined Nemesis as a villain and monster. I kind of have a bit of a knife in my back with the remake as a whole. And I do not say that lightly! The remake of Resident Evil 2 and 4 are probably some of the better remakes you can look to, since they take the original concept of the games, story, and even gameplay and give them a proper modern day spin. But the remake of Resident Evil 3 is the black sheep in the RE remakes. Not only does it lack a lot of the charm and mechanics that the original Resident Evil 3 had, such as live selection and actual areas you could explore, but it really downgraded Nemesis. For the last time, get that stupid frickin' nose off your face, Nemesis! I know for a fact that there are people who do actually enjoy this game, and while I may disagree with them thinking that it's a good game and I lack the ability to do mind control yet, it really lacks a lot of the charm that the original Resident Evil 3 had, or even that the Resident Evil 2 remake had. And by saying that, I'm sure most people are going to be...
Jesus Christ!
Of course, there's also one of the latest remakes in recent time, Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door. With this, it's really the small things that kind of drew my attention, as there was one notable change that caught my eye, and I have to say it threw me for a bit of a loop. I'm sure I'm not the only one who noticed it, and it involves about a character. Yes, that's right. I'm talking about the Goombas that hit on Goombella, alright? What? What were you expecting? Like, in the grand scheme of things, what I'm about to say is on the level of a paper cut, but enough paper cuts will cause you to bleed out. There are changes, such as the Goombas that you encounter in the prologue of the game no longer hitting on Goombella, and then you promptly kick their asses. There are a lot of different changes in the Switch version as well, such as upping the initial number of items you can carry, money is really easy to get, having Mario's running speed be a bit faster so he can outrun enemies easier, and the characters having back sprites. You'll notice that a lot of these changes can be positive or negative. With the items and speed, I consider that a bit of a negative since the game really feels like a lot easier with these changes. As for the dialogue points, I've heard it's supposed to be a lot closer to the original script for the GameCube's Japanese version. While I won't say much on that, I will say that I've seen evidence for and against this, including a translated script that I found from 2004 that hasn't been updated since then. And looking at that specific Goomba interaction, I pointed out, "Hey, I see you got a cutie with you." It shows that the interaction was indeed more focused around Goombella than us being a surface dweller. So I'm at the very least a little skeptical about the claim of it being more closer to the original Japanese. Really, all goes to your mileage and how you want to view these sorts of things. While I did enjoy the changes in fixing the backtracking in the Thousand Year Door, I did have to raise my eyebrow for other changes. Specifically for the Thousand Year Door, the changes weren't enough for me to really call it a remake. It felt more like a remaster that had small changes, especially since the story and gameplay aren't that drastically different from the original. And yet, it still has those changes that make it weird to me. Yeah, a nice coat of paint is good, and at least the game isn't Sticker Star, God that belonged in the trash. But there are just some weird aftertastes in the game that I noticed after I'd beaten it. Not saying it was bad, but it was noticeable. So with my jaw thoroughly broken and the retention time in this video shot, let's really talk about the games that are chosen for the remake and remaster block. Though I've already talked about it, The Last of Us is known to have a lot of remasters under its belt, regardless of the fact of there being backwards compatibility for some of the games and systems, so making a remaster sometimes just felt weird. But the real point I'm trying to get here, if I ever had one, is that sometimes the choices for remakes and remasters is odd. When you look towards the first Pokemon remakes, Fire Red and Leaf Green, there was an actual reason for them to be made, and that would be because there wasn't an actual way to transfer Pokemon from Gens 1 and 2 to the recent game at the time, Gen 3, Ruby and Sapphire. So there was a pretty practical reason for the remakes to be made, as well as improving on the original Red and Blue, because if you know my thoughts on Generation 1, I'm not a big fan! So when I'm given the chance, I'll probably play the remakes, and hey, not only do they have the graphics and optimization of Generation 3, they actively added more content into the games as well, so you're really getting a good deal for that. So there's an actual reason to play the remake over the original games. Most of the time, the games that get the remake remaster treatment are games that are already pretty solid and have popularity to them. Paper Mario, Final Fantasy VII, The Last of Us, Metal Gear Solid, and don't get me wrong, when it comes to some of the classic games, they should be available for people to access to play in one form or another. However, for every classic game that was given this treatment, countless other games are left in the dust and stuck on the platformers where they were on, unless you count piracy. In which case, go nuts, but for people who actually like to own the games, whether digitally or in my case physically, that can be a bit of a pain, especially if you want to have the experience that came with the game. I'll always point to old games like God Hand, or Yu-Gi-Oh's Duelist of the Roses, or even Persona 2's both halves, which is notorious for only having the first half being ported via the West via remake, and the second part only being available on the PS1. These are only a few of the games that are pretty much stuck on the hardware that they were brought to, and yeah, there's a good old emulation, and I won't say that's not a good way to play old games, but keeping on with topic, there are plenty of games that could be selected for the remaster and remake treatment, especially for those who can't actually get the games through emulation. We are now living in a time where game preservation is kind of important, especially since games are relatively young in comparison to other sources of media. And there are several games that are hard to find and play. I have a used game store near where I live, and I was able to get my hands on stuff like the Metabots Metabee game, or Rogue Galaxy, or some other games I'd like to buy, but if I did, I'd probably have to skip a few meals and not pay my editor here. Sorry, Ozzy. Eventually, these games are going to be gone, what with physical media actually decaying and with some companies like Nintendo cracking down on emulation. It really feels like it's going to be harder and harder for people to experience the games of the past, and that's where things like remasters and remakes can come into play. To a degree. Because with remasters, more often than not, it's not going to be a game like Brave Prince or Musashi being remade.
Take that back, you little turd!
And games that get that remake treatment, much like the stuff of the Resident Evil remakes, won't actually give you the same experience that the original games will give you, with the exception of the remake of the first game and funnily enough the fourth one to an extent. They won't be exact, mind you, but remasters don't exactly capture the exact same feel as the original either. Ironically enough, probably the best example to highlight this is Shadow of the Colossus, a game that I'm sure a ton of people hold dear in their heart received not only a remaster but also a remake. And don't get me wrong, looking at the PS4 remake, it looks really beautiful, but I can't help but feel with this additional beauty it misses the depressive atmosphere that the original game managed to nail. The Forbidden Land is supposed to be a harsh place, a place unkempt by man, and the remake's admittedly impressive graphics kind of fly in the face of that. I'm not knocking the remake of the Shadow of the Colossus, and I'm keenly aware that this could be my nostalgia goggles suffocating the oxygen to my brain, or brain cell. But I felt a different experience when playing the remake of this classic game than what I did to the original PS2. I know I went a little off topic, but my point stands that games that do get this treatment are games that are already popular and other games get left in the dust. And to make matters worse, sometimes games that get the remake and remaster treatment will probably not hit the same notes as the original game. Ports would probably be the best way to go about this, but good luck with ports for a ton of games. But even with the remakes and remasters, that leads to the last issue that I have with them. Back when the Resident Evil 4 remake came out, you couldn't help but see the conversation turn to which version of the game was better, with a lot of people saying that while the two are both good, still managed to lean towards the remake version of the game since it included more modernized gameplay elements, additional content, and changes to certain characters. And on the other side, well, everyone remembers the garbage fare that was the Crowcat video, Soul versus Soulless. It's also to the point where people will call the remake a masterpiece, which, while I'm certainly not going to say RE4 Remake is a bad game by any means, in comparison to the fact that the original Resident Evil 4 was a trailblazer for many games afterwards, I feel that the term masterpiece doesn't really apply to the remake, especially since RE4 Remake takes a lot more cues from The Last of Us gameplay, which is ironic. Semantics aside, there's one thing I want you guys to really think about with some remakes and remaster titles. Resident Evil's remakes, The Thousand Year Door, Dead Space. They don't expressly say that they're remakes, but rather come off as they're just replacements for the originals, and with the exception of Dead Space, it's not that easy to get a hold of the original games above. I realize that's completely superficial, but let's really consider something like the original Yakuza game. Now, I like to meme on the game from time to time, especially for its writing and voice acting.
You fucking Yakuza! Don't fuck with Kazuki-san!
How many times I gotta tell you, I'm not Yakuza. You're retarded or just deaf.
Classic Kiryu.
Fuck you!
Now, the original game is stuck on the PlayStation 2, and without really bringing the game over to the other platforms, the Yakuza series, after getting some prominence and life brought back into it via Zero, RGG Studios thought to remake the first two games with a modern coat of paint. And that's all well and good, but as someone who ironically does enjoy the original game, especially with the odd fact that Majima is voiced by Mark Hamill.
This is the part where you're supposed to laugh! Laugh, you stupid motherfucker!
It really feels like the original Yakuza game is becoming a lost piece of media, especially since Kiwami, in my opinion, does a lot of overcorrection with its choices, like with the Majima Everywhere mechanic, which can quickly become a grind fest. Or, as I brought up in the last section, that the remake of Shadow of the Colossus, at least to me, the updated graphics really mess with the intended atmosphere of the game. Now, obviously this stuff isn't fact. This is me giving my opinion, and it sucks that I have to say that it is my opinion because my channel has been nothing but a full-on opinionated channel. So, feels like that you come with the territory automatically. But I know there are other people who have felt the same way as me, and what I do hope is that these remakes and remasters will eventually come don't actually hurt the original vision of these games. I am looking towards something like the Ace Attorney Investigation Collection, which allows people to switch between the old and new graphics for the games, which honestly speaking is something that I think a lot of remakes and remasters should do. Hell, even Dead Rising Remastered is actually doing the same thing with Frank's original model. Kinda wish they could do the same thing with the voice, but Hell, Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door had a similar thing where you could acquire the badge that allowed you to swap between the original and new music. These sorts of options should be available so that way the original creative vision of the game can at the very least be maintained. One of the things that makes games from the older generation sparkle to me is that they had to be made under much more constrained conditions, hardware, and frankly speaking, a ton of limitations. And sometimes limitations can be used to help make something a lot more memorable. The original Silent Hill had issues with its draw distancing, and because of that, the fog around the town was used to disguise some technical limitations in rendering the game world continuously. And frankly speaking, it worked really well with the horror elements and the atmosphere of the game. The only thing scarier than the fog is the voice acting in the game.
Where are you going?
And sometimes the lack of limitations can change things for the worse. It's not a set in stone thing, but something that I do need to bring up. I do not want this video to be taken the wrong way. While I do have my issues with remakes and remasters, they do have a place in the video game industry. However, the games that get chosen, as well as how often these games get the treatment that these games are rarely great, is really low. However, we all know there's one reason and only one reason why some games get remade. Money! Money, money, money! I know, that's cynical and overtly generalized, but in today's gaming industry, it really feels like that's the case. Remake and remaster something popular. After all, the game has already proven that it can sell, why not remake it for the third time? Honestly speaking, I wouldn't have much of an issue with remakes and remasters if we had a lot more accessibility to the original versions and interpretations of the games. I brought up the Ace Attorney Investigations Collections that is coming out, which is bringing a game to the West that was only available in Japan for years, all the while allowing people to have the ability to play the games with the original visuals. But another example is the recently announced Yu-Gi-Oh! Early Days Collection that has a number of old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Games on it, including games that again we haven't gotten in the West for years. If companies actually took an effort to actually port their games, or at the very least preserve them, having remakes and remasters would be a good thing without me having these opinions. Because one of the best ways to get people really invested in your products is to offer them choices. And frankly speaking, with game preservation becoming an issue more and more, I can only just say one thing. I really want to kick people in the balls. I'm not totally against the idea of remakes or remasters, but they certainly are aspects of the gaming industry that make it hard for me to support that when there's a lack of support for the original titles that were made. But regardless, what are your guys' thoughts? Do you think my thoughts of remakes and remasters are solid? What are your thoughts on remakes and remasters alone? Do you think I'm blowing this out of the water? Do you think I'm too crazy? I don't know. Leave a like and a comment if you're chill. You're chill, right? I'm MangaKamen, and thanks for watching. Later!